What's up, everybody? I'm here in a gorgeous day in Pennsylvania for another great stream. So, we're gonna do something a little bit different today. In the past, we've been focusing on the direct painting of this pattern. We even did some direct painting over here. Got to make sure I'm not covering it. Since I did this on Tuesday, I've actually wiped most of it off. It was a bit too opaque. So I've wiped some of it off. It's still a bit darker, and I might keep most of it like that and just paint in some shadows. I'm not sure yet, but you'll see a lot of tape here. And that tape is some of the things that I'm going to be working on next. Actually, before I get to any of these painted sections, which are going to be direct painted, just like this or the pattern on here, and I'm gonna do some gold jewelry painted indirect. I like to do gold indirect because it's really difficult to get a good gold color with enough variations to make it look really good and have the depth that gold has, in my opinion. So I like to paint gold indirect, so I'm going to be doing that. And we can't do the darks and the lights at the same time because they can't mix. So maybe I'll leave it up to the viewers, you guys, which I should do, darks or lights. We'll get that sorted out in a second. So these are masked off. I'm going to be working on some of the dress. Probably, absolutely, we're going to get to this point today. I have the beginnings of some other things masked off, more of the dress. This I've masked off again because I do want to do something with that eventually. But for now, that's all just preparation. We're going to be focusing right here where I've got the camera pointed. It's not a whole lot bigger than looking at it in the main camera, but this thing sucks. It doesn't have zoom, so you got to deal with it. So actually, if you didn't tune in on Tuesday was a weird stream. I promised more on Monday for Tuesday that I could deliver. I was rushing around in the hour I have between work and the stream to get things prepped, and it was hectic. It was crazy. And I'm going to put that off for a little bit. I think that needs to wait until there's a new painting, and maybe the preparatory stuff will be in a separate YouTube video, because watching paint dry live is not entertaining. Who would have thought? So if you weren't here on Thursday or Tuesday, we took the tape off of this mask, and I couldn't be happier. It's probably still really tough to see the nuance in it. However, it is a little less glossy, so you can see a little bit more of the variation there. We had a bit of a scare here. I thought some of the paint had bled through in the eye hole here, but I just forgot to take a piece of tape off, and it came off and everything was good. There was a little bit of running here, but it was your typical, paint getting underneath the tape situation. We were able to just get some paint thinner, mineral spirits on our towel, our paper towel, and just wipe it off, clean it up a little bit, and that was it. Also, I already mentioned this, we painted it. I wasn't sold, so for now that's on the back burner. It is still retaped. I retaped it after I took the tape off last week. We'll get to that eventually. We'll see what happens after this gold jewelry here. So, I know I've talked about it before, but indirect painting is a multi-step process to get your end result, whereas direct paint, even here I going to be direct, but this is still an underlying layer that won't get covered up. So we can't really call this direct painting, but it's also not indirect. Somewhere in the middle, it's weird. Direct painting would be what we did here. This is absolutely direct. We mixed a color, we put it on our surface, and that's it. It's not going to change. Although we are going to do some details in that eventually. Not quite yet, because I'm not sold that it's dry enough to do that. So that might be a next week thing. But with indirect painting, we are not even worrying about color first. We're only worrying about value, lights and darks. And we're going to be using two paints for those. We have our burnt umber and white. So our shadows are going to be in burnt umber. This color here, you can see it in action, and highlights in white. We never mix them. We never make a medium brown by mixing these two. We're going to use the medium value of the orange Imprimatura here, the burnt sienna, as our middle value. So we're only painting more and more white, denser white, to make it a stronger highlight, and denser burnt umber to make our darkest value. Now, you may think, oh, that's not black. How are you going to do your blacks? Well, this will eventually be black, but not quite yet. We're just going to work with value, and then there are layers that go on afterwards of color, almost like printing out a black and white version of a photo and then putting what's that called, acetate or whatever, like colored acetate over top. That's going to be our color. But then even after that, we're going to still work some highlights and shadows into that, because when we put those layers over top of this, it's going to bring it more towards the middle value, and we're going to lose our contrast, our really light lights and our really dark darks. And that's when we go in with white, maybe like a really dark blue, maybe burnt umber in some areas. It really depends on what color we have glazed on top and what we're trying to achieve. So we'll get to that. We're not going to worry about glazing after this. It really has to be done kind of all at once, multiple steps, much later on in the painting. So we're gonna do that. We're going to paint our lights and darks on this gold jewelry, and it doesn't really matter which one we start with. So if anyone has a preference, let me know in chat. If not, I'm just gonna pick one. Doesn't really matter to me. So I'm tempted to start with the darks. It looks like the darks are going to be a little easier. But before I paint anything, we're going to go back to our white charcoal and our ruler, and we're going to just do some very quick layout stuff here, some drawing, to make sure that what we're doing is placed relatively well. Looking at this is actually a strange piece of jewelry. It's like a bunch of little, very thin bracelets kind of all attached to each other. So there's going to be a lot of texture in this. It's not going to be a solid piece of gold, which would be a hell of a lot easier. But I'm going to draw a little bit of this. Let me know if you want lights or darks in the chat. For now, I'm just going to put in a couple of these lines. So there are already a few of them here. Specifically this here. So we're just going to lighten this up a little bit. And there is another one. Oops. That's going to get annoying. There's another one like right here. Another strong line there. And I'm going to draw in some lines on this side too that'll give me a general idea on this side, but there's also this here. It might be the part of the jewelry that's holding it all together. I can't really tell from my source, to be honest. It was made such a long time ago when I was really looking at it in super detail, and I exported a less detailed version to my iPad here. So we're gonna have to inspect it, try and understand it before we can paint it. So this line here, what I'm doing is I'm basically measuring an angle from here, this strange angle in the hand, to where this line intersects here. I'm thinking it's somewhere around here, but we'll figure that out. So we're gonna get that angle quick. And to be honest, I'm gonna double check that. Doesn't seem accurate. And guess what? It wasn't at all. So, thinking it's about right here, maybe off to the side a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then we're just going to draw a line right there. So this is essentially, this white charcoal is basically acting like this burnt umber paint that we did the pattern here in. It's just kind of like an underdrawing that we're going to use to lay things out. We don't want to add more than is absolutely necessary. Here we need a lot, here we don't. So I'm really only going to do a few more lines and we're going to get to painting. So, and actually I think I'm going to just eyeball this. I just put charcoal on my paint there. I think that's pretty good. So we have our real quick structure down here. I'm going to rub this charcoal so that it's very, very, very light, because once paint goes over top of it, it's going to seal it in, and unless we want it to show, you know, we want to keep it as light as possible so that it doesn't show through the paint. Also, if it's really, really a really strong line, sometimes when you paint over it, the white of the charcoal will mix with your paint and it'll make like a gross gray muddy color, which we want to avoid. So I'm going to start with not quite my, you know, crazy detail brush here. We're not going to be using this thing. We're going to use this brush, which is in awful condition. I don't know if you can see it there, but it is just not a good brush. And it's one that I've been using for a really long time, and it's just comfortable for me to kind of block in some medium fine detail. So we're going to use this first. If we need to, we're going to get the fine detail brush out and go from there. So I need to get some burnt umber on my palette, and we're going to start painting. So this isn't going to look much different in you know, it's not going to look much different than this drawing here, except it's going to be blocked in color. But you'll see. I'm going to shut up. I talk way too much. You came here to see some painting. I'm going to give you some painting. Here we go. Getting some of my medium, pulling it out on my palette, making sure it's a good milky consistency. This brush will hold a lot more than that little detail brush. And I want to use that to an advantage, fill it up really well, and get to work. So, this is going to be much on my iPad. The resolution is only so good. So this is going to be difficult, but we'll figure it out. So there's a very distinct shadow on the left side. It's kind of a jagged line. You can definitely tell where all of the individual bracelets are. That's where I'm going to start. It's going to be a pretty easy starting point because it's kind of a solid block. So we're going to start laying this in. Here's where I'm going to reference this one line here. Now, this is very, very thick and runny. I got it a bit too milky, I guess you could say. So this is really thick, and I'm very scared to kind of press it and lift some of it off. So when I do this, I'm going to kind of roll my finger a little bit and take a little bit off over time so that I'm not just mushing it down and making it spread out and go everywhere. So again, roll. So this is certainly thinner now. So we're in an okay spot here. What it did was it kind of did spread out a bit too much here. So I can go back in with the back end of my brush and lift that up. And this here needs to go in a little bit. I'm going to make this a little darker again. And actually there's a bit of reflected light on the very, very, very left edge. So I'm going to use the edge of my thumb here and I'm going to lift a little bit more than everywhere else. Just on that left edge. And some of the light reflecting off of the fabric of the chair. So, moving on, I actually am going to switch to my detail brush to finish up this shape because there is a lot of very fine lines that come out of it. Now remember, we don't want to paint lines, we want to paint shapes. Sometimes those shapes look a lot like lines. So we're going to get this brush loaded. This might actually be too So if you're wondering why this isn't masked off, the reason is I've already masked off the blue of the chair, and it's already got kind of a raised there where the blue meets the Imprimatura, kind of like this. So I'm not too worried about painting over the paint. It's relatively easy to paint within the shape here after the fact. So So about here. Okay, now there's a shadow along the left edge of this line we put here, where they all kind of connect. So I'm gonna start working on some of those shadows along the left edge. Remember, not painting lines, painting shapes. They're going to vary. It's not just going to be like that. It's going to have curves. It's going to have thicker spots, thinner spots. And hopefully you can see that with this poster of a camera. If not, I do hope to get a replacement for that camera. I can put that camera here and have a 4K camera, so we can get some crazy detail on what we're doing as we're doing. So, back at it. Now, I do need to be careful I don't touch the blue of the mask there. It is still wet from last week. That would be kind of a catastrophe. So the way I'm working here, it's such fine detail that I can't really lift things as much as I'd like to. What I do in that situation is I will try to very faintly blur an edge or the whole shape with my brush with some very tight, almost scribbling, almost like hatching, if you're familiar with that technique from drawing. And it will get the effect, you know, I'm looking for. It's not perfect, but the only other option would be switching to a dry brush and kind of pulling it out, which this I already take way too long painting. I'm so slow. I can't make it last longer. So just gonna lift this a little bit, and now we have that edge there. Okay. Now I'm gonna do some very prominent shadows on this side, and then we'll work on some of the finer stuff in the middle here. So I don't know how much of this you can see on the detail camera. How many little bracelets are there? So I'm breaking my rule about counting things and knowing, you know, before you start, because there are just too many, and there's so many that you can't tell. From the resolution just isn't there. I'd have to basically have a microscope at this point to see them. So what I'm doing is I'm breaking them down into shapes and painting the shapes, you know, the dark shapes. Definitely don't want to have, you know, lines going, you know, all the way across. You'll see some of these resemble lines, and that will happen. But for the most part, I'm focusing on the shapes that I'm seeing rather than individual bracelets, because, to be honest, I don't know. I'll never know from this. And that's okay. It's still going to look great in the end. So, done the darkest of the shadows here. So now I'm going to move on to a bit of the more like mid dark values. So I need a bit more medium in my brush. It's going to thin it out a little bit. It's going to be more transparent. And we're going to get these subtleties needed in here. So for the most part, we're almost done with these shadows. May not look like much, but once we get the highlights in there, it's going to kind of triple the amount of detail in there, because we're going to essentially be adding highlights and mid values, which right now kind of just seem like empty space. So I am going to kind of flex this a little bit more and get this to, you know, exactly where it needs to be, and then we will move on to a different area. What that's going to be yet, still not sure, but we'll see how it goes. So the really minute detail is going to be super light. It's what's really going to make this really look great once you have the highlights. Now, if you use a lot of medium, it's going to be shiny. And you can use that to your advantage, because even though you're talking super, like barely darker than the background in Prematura, you know, layer, you're going to be able to see where it is because it's going to be shiny when you go back in to put your highlights in, and you don't want to paint over it. You never want to mix the lights and darks. So it's tough to kind of see the value, but you can see that it's shiny, and that's going to be extremely helpful when you're at the next step, which is painting in the lights. Now, I could potentially paint in the lights right now. I don't know if I want to risk it. This is really fine detail. We'll see how it goes. Probably not. I want to. I really do, so you can kind of see the end result. But I think it'll have to be next week. So, moving on. Another important part of indirect painting is that you make sure your soft edges are absolutely kind of gradient and blended. Because of this method, it's kind of easy to like get some shapes going and leave your hard edge, but once that hard edge is there, you can't get rid of it once you go back in with the whites. So you really need to make sure that you're kind of teasing those edges, whether you're using your brush, your thumb, some other method. It's super important because once those cure, getting rid of that hard edge is impossible. And you definitely don't want a hard edge on a curved area, you know, that will just completely flatten that section of the painting. So I need to make sure I go back in here, and some of these are a little softer than others. Right now I'm really trying to get rid of the lininess of this. You know, when I started, I'm kind of marking the spaces, marking, you know, the edges of my shapes that I'm painting. And because of, you know, this being a lot of linear bracelets, it just looks like lines like this. So I really want to go back in and make sure I break that up and that it doesn't just look like lines. Because that's going to detract from the viewer's understanding of what they're looking at. You know, like if we were to make each one of these just over, that's the one thing we want to avoid in any representational painting. You know, in things like illustration or even like like some graphic design, that's okay. But we're not doing that, we're painting. And I just put my finger in this, that's fun. Luckily, it's not too bad here. Surprisingly enough, the back side or back of your brush is pretty good at blending. May seem strange, but you can really get into some of the paint and pull it out like this, and it does a surprisingly good job. I don't know how that looks on screen. In fact, it's basically impossible to see, so I really need to figure out something to do here for this camera. There's a lot of glare. Well, that's super close, but that would be ideal. That would be a great position to have this camera. I might be able to pull this off. Let's do it. How is that? That's a little better. I mean, looks kind of ridiculous coming in here, but we're gonna deal with that. So it's also kind of weird having it that close to my face when I'm painting, but I'll get over it. So I think we're getting really close, if we're not there already. I just want to triple check some things here. Because once this dries, it is not a whole lot of options going back in with indirect painting. It's kind of unforgiving at this stage, but the end result looks so great. I could bring an indirect painting of mine in, but we'll see. If I take a break, I'll go out and grab it. So, do want to lift this a little bit there. So you'll see me moving around a lot. Really, I'm trying to see it without glare. It's really hard to avoid glare with the studio lighting. It's really hard to avoid glare when you're working with paint this transparent at any point. So these studio lights make it really, really, really hard. So you'll see me moving around. The last thing I need to do is I really need to kind of blur this edge where the bracelet meets the skin. I also am kind of concerned that's a bit dark. It does seem to look correct. So we're going to blur this a little bit. Right now we're essentially giving the bracelet depth here where they meet the skin rather than being, you know, flat like this. They curve, they have a lip to them. You always want to make sure you capture that. Otherwise what you're painting is always going to look flat.